people to submit their chapters, and that's very, very innovative
And why they
effort.
said two chapters each? Because they initially conceived of, the thought that this novel would be written by 12 writers. So 12 writers, 24 chapters into two. But it didn't work out like that. So there were only six
Then,
writers.
then, then how Sarala Devi
Huh.
become the dominating writers? Because she contributed, I think, nine
Nine
chapters.
chapters.
So it was,
Yeah, nine chapters.
initially it was decided that everyone will write two chapters.
Two chapters.
Then how Sarla Devi, and sometimes it is said that there is something very personal, very autobiographical about the life of Sarla Devi, which is reflected in this novel. So how do you see that?
No, I basically see it in this way. Uh, First of all, remember there is a point here which says that if the submissions by the contributors are not up to the mark, if they're not on track or to the point, then they have to be rejected. Others will be assigned their portions, or some people will write those chapters. So maybe since the novel writing was not very mature at that time, it had not developed to that point, that degree of sophistication, they didn't find too many writers. So Kalindicharan Panigrahi ended up writing 5 chapters, and Sarala Devi wrote 6 chapters. But Sarala Devi, it was not made public at that time. They wrote under pseudonyms. If you read the installments in Utkala Sahitya, you will not find the names of the original authors. Because Sarala Devi wrote under her own name, Sarala Devi, but she also wrote the other chapters under 2 or 3 pseudonyms.
Right.
Sariso, Aparna Devi, some,
Yeah.
I have talked about that. So, and as you rightly said, that the theme, somehow, Basanti, an independent woman, the first, woman in Odisha to question her place in the world, to
And challenging patriarchy, male hegemony,
convention, male convention, patriarchy. Probably Sarala Devi's personal life was to some extent mirrored there, because Sarala Devi, she had a very, she demanded an equal relationship with her husband, and she also
she brought up the issue of marital rape
rape.
in 1940s, actually.
No, even before that.
Yeah.
Even before that, and there was a memoir written by a Swiss woman called Frida Hosworth Das. She married an Odia, Sarangadhara Das, and she became Frida Hosworth Das. So Frida wrote a very interesting memoir of her days in Odisha. It's called A Marriage to India, in which she wrote about her encounter with Sarala Devi, but she, of course, did not write her real name. She turned Sarala into Bimala. And she wrote about this encounter, which is very, very graphic, very, very interesting, where Bimala told her one day that, she would like to accuse her husband of rape. So she was devastated that a woman, a young girl of 16, 17, who can barely speak English, is able to say this in her own way. She was simply amazed. And she mentioned this to her husband, Sarangadhara, and Sarangadhara was simply aghast. He said, "You don't interfere in this matter. You don't bother about it. This is not this is a subject which is very sensitive." So there is also this, as you rightly said, personal thing about Arunada Shankar Rai's.
I know I was really afraid that if we will start talking about Basanti, it will take all the time. So that and the time is running very fast, and we have barely 5 minutes in our hand. So yeah, now we can go to another book that you have translated, another pathfinding novel by Jagdish Mahanti. Again, very underrated and not taken very seriously by the literary critics,
Establishment.
establishments. Battles of our own.
So,
Nija Nija Panipatha. So why Jagdish Mahanti? I know you are a ardent fan of Jagdish Mahanti since your college days. And we talked about this on many occasions. So why Jagdish Mahanti? And finally, Dipti Patnaik.
yeah, yeah. Thank you, Gadar. I mean, Jagdish is my first love. If I would have not been commissioned by Oxford University Press to translate Basanti, I would have first taken up Jagadish. Yesterday there was a session on translation here, with Professor Jatindra Naik moderated, and Mani Rao, Deepa Ganesh, and others were panelists, and they were talking about how somebody translates something, and there were two views. Two views. One view is that translators rarely translate things out of their own personal choices. There is a historical climate, there is a cultural climate which compels them to translate certain things. Opposite to that was another view by Deepa Ganesh, by Mani Rao, which says that you don't translate because of any conformity to any cultural code or any cultural ethos. You translate because you like something. I think these are contradictory views, but both are true. Both are true. In one sense, translation is a very subjective enterprise. It's a very subjective, very solitary process. But in another sense, translator also partake of the cultural ethos of the time. Okay. Now you talked about Jagadish Mahanti. Jagadish Mahanti is my personal favorite because I grew up in my student days. Jagadish Mahanti was our Odia literature's version of existentialist writers like Kafka, Camus, and Sartre. We would read Kafka and Camus, and we would look for a homegrown version of that, and we would find that in Jagadish Mahanti. Starting from very superficial signs of that, like characters mentioned as their initials. Joseph K. Jagadish Mahanti will create characters with J. So, but also deeper engagement with the isolation and alienation of an industrial landscape. Jagadish Mahanti captured it very sensitively and very accurately. So that is one thing.
Yeah, I think he's the only author who talks about the mining, the coal fields, the plight of no, that one. The existential question is one, but the portrayal of a real life, portrayal of a real struggle, and that is also very important.
How does alienation happen? It's when you live under a forced name, a forced identity, and in the mining. In the coal mining areas, this happened because the land of the tribals was taken away. And in return, they were given compensation and they were given employment in the mining areas, in the coal mines, in the factories. Now, many mafias, land mafias, would reach out to these tribals and say that, we will give you 2,000 rupees. You lend us your identity. So another high caste person from the coastal area will get that job. So Pradyumna gets employment in the coal mine under the name of Samaru Khadiya. And he's constantly, searching for his identity. He's constantly searching for who he is. He knows that he is Pradyumna Mishra, but in his work field, he's known as Samaru Khadiya, son of Baitu Khadiya. So that is how Jagadish Mahanti, brought in this existentialist theme, or rather grafted it onto a very different kind of landscape. Now, the other thing is, as I said, this is my personal choice, but the other thing is, translations also have something to do with the cultural ethos. How is it possible? It is my subjective choice, but my subjective choice can sometimes be determined by what I see happening in the world around me. Now, in the literary establishment in Bhubaneswar, I found that most writers were able to get translated and published because of their clout, because of their clout, because of their connection. It is not, not for nothing that in Odisha, most famous literary personalities are also very famous bureaucrats. I'm not saying that their writings do not have merit. I'm not saying that. But writers with the same merit, but without that social position, may sometimes find it very difficult to get published and translated. So this is what led me to look for writers who have not been part of the literary establishment. And one such person was Jagadish Mahanti. One such person was Jagadish Mahanti. In fact, I read one article by Asit Mahanti in a book, Why Did Jagadish Mahanti Not Get the Central Sahitya Academy Award? He was such an important name. He was such an important exponent of the existentialist strain in Odia literature. He revolutionized the short story form in Odia literature in the 70s and 80s. But why is it that he didn't get the Sahitya Academy Award? To answer this question, you have to come to Odia society, the literary establishment, the question of canon formation, and so on and so forth. So, this is how my subjective choice is also determined by my understanding of the cultural climate. And here I'll just take a 1 minute break to say how translation is also a discourse of history. Because our personal choices are also determined by larger historical currents. My collaborator, Paul St. Pierre, who also collaborated with me on this novel, on this translation, has prepared a fascinating bibliography of translations into Odia.
Into Odia or?
Into Odia.
Okay.
Into Odia. So from 1807, which is the year in which the first printed book was produced in Odisha. First printed book, and it was a translation. 1807 to 2006, 7,000 translations were produced. He has a detailed database of translations into Odia. And just to give one example, how translation is a discourse of history, he takes the year 1965. Okay. In 65, there were 52 items of translation published in Odia, out of which 30 translations were from British and American literature. In 1995, the total number of items published was 51. So 52, here 51. In 65, out of 52, 30 were items translated from British and American literature. In 1995, out of 51, only 12 items were from British and American and European sources. The rest were from India. So how did this happen? How did this change happen? In 1965, Britain or India was looking more towards the West. In 1995, paradoxically, it was the year of globalization. In 1995, India was looking more inward. It was trying to draw more, becoming more self-confident. So they found an Indian writing in English worthy of translation, apart from Indian Bhasa literature, texts into Odia. So this is how translation is a discourse of history. But translators do not necessarily sit together, talk, and translate. But they nevertheless partake of a cultural climate which is full of contradictions, which is full of flux, and this is how a very interesting profile of a culture can be drawn. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mahapatra. I think we took a little bit more time, but still we left one book.
In fact, I talked about this book at the beginning.
At the beginning, okay.
This is Dipti Ranjan Patnaik. He is also, I would say, is a very, very promising, very important writer of Odia short fiction. He's now a professor of English in Banaras Hindu University. He was my colleague in Utkal University until 2008. But since 2008, he has been in BHU. But he's a regular contributor, and many people know him here. He has written probably one of the most significant uh, corpus of body of work on on children, on child. The development of it's a very important contribution to literature centered on children, not necessarily children's stories, but literature centered on children.
Yeah.
So,
So
that is the title of this novel, Banka Harichandan.
the life and times of
Life and
Banka
Times.
Harichandan. So we discussed about 3 books, but it's your journey as a translator. And thank you very much for sharing few interesting viewpoints and mostly talking about Basanti. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gadar, and thank you very much.
Oh, there is a question from that side.
Oh, yeah. I can.
So while deciding on the title of the novel in English, did the publishers have anything to say about the
No.
title in English?
No,
They did not.
no. For Battles of Our Own, our initial proposal was battlefields, because Nija Nija Panipat. So we suggested battlefields, but they wanted to shorten it to battle.
And Simon Schuster said, what did they say?
No, they accepted
About
it.
the life and times.
They accepted it as it is.
Because we have a novel.
Michael's Life and Times.
Life and Time of Michael K.
Life and Times of Michael K. But they said nothing.
Nothing to do. Thank you.
It can be the same, of course. Okay, but thank you.
So, in Kuwatji's case, it is Life and Times without the "the." Without the "the." But here it is the Life and Times. Yes.
Okay, there is one more question, but we are running out of time. So very quick.
Thanks so much for this enriching session. Just 2 humble observations. One is that maybe we can take it up later. One is that when you say an epic novel or epic novel or epic literary work, what guides us to actually tell that or conclude that some work is epic? Because there are a number of factors that actually play in when we actually decide what is epic and what is not. Number 2 is that, especially to Dr. Mahapatra, is that you have been translating for ages now, and you have
Only last 5 years.
yeah, you have been doing that for some time, and a lot of good experience with you in terms of translating. What I was thinking that in terms of having kind of enumerated the challenges that you're facing from translating from one language to the other, and especially getting into the author's mind and using a different language. So there are a lot of young translators coming up. So maybe you would feel like, having these learnings written somewhere so that, you create more translators,
Sure.
as many books as you translate.
Yes, thank you, Sanjay, for this for the 2 questions. Your first question is about epic. What is it?
Actually, not a question. So
No.
You can go on.
it's more of an
No,
observation.
I'm saying
so
that
we can take it up later.
we describe something as an epic journey, not necessarily because of its volume. It need not be a very big book, to merit the level of the epic. It can be a very paradigmatic quest, for example. It may be a very defining exploration of a very unusual theme. That can also be considered an epic journey or an epic quest. It's not necessarily the length of a book. I mean, although epics are very long, but we can use the word epic in a more metaphorical way here. And number 2, about the role of a translator as an educator, yes, I very much believe, because I am a teacher. I have taught all my life, so I know that it is very important to record your learning, your observations. In fact, I wrote a very long essay along with my collaborator Paul St. Pierre on the translation of Basanti. I wrote an essay in which we talked about the difference, or sorry, the characteristics of collaborative translation. How do we translate in collaboration? Because that is a question that has, many people have asked this question: how Paul St. Pierre translates with you, and we have answered that question. That we say that we separate out the two activities that are involved in translation. One is the reading, the other is the writing. Because ultimately, what is translation? Translation is reading a text in one language and writing it in another language. That is what translation is. So if we separate out these activities to some extent, not absolutely, there cannot be a dichotomy. There cannot be a complete polarization, but to some extent we can theoretically separate. You read in one language and write in another language. So many of the transactions that happen in the process can be spelled out. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I have the essay. It's a published essay, which I'll share with you.
Yeah.
How we have
thanks.
created an afterlife for the novel Basanti. Thank you.
I hope there will be another session on collaborative writing and collaborative translation. So thank you very much, sir. And I took the credit that I was the first person to bring you to ODI writing.
Yes, of course.
I forced you to write in ODI actually, way back in 2006, 7, 8. Thank you very much, Professor Mahapatra. So this is an interesting session, and it's not. This is the first session, but I hope it will continue and we will have more sessions. Thank you very much.
No, I thank my interlocutor. When I saw the program schedule, I phoned him and said, I called him and said they couldn't have found a better interlocutor. But thank you very much, and thank you very much. All of you.
A huge round of applause for our panelists. I want to express my sincere gratitude to our esteemed panelists for the valuable contributions. So moving towards the next session of the second day, art of poetry, perception, perspective, and profoundness. I would like to call the speakers of this session, Mr. Asutosh Parida, Odia poet, Ms. Arundhati Subramaniam, Indian author and writer, Ms. Mani Rao, and with moderator, Mr. Keda Mishra. Please have a huge round of applause for all of them.
We'll try. We'll try, but I'm not sure.
केदार भाई आपण मॉडरेट करथिया भितर मत के देखि पारि
So he's Dr. Asutosh Parida. So he's the academy already this year. We are writing. Arundhati. Namaskar. Let's go. So again, the same face, the same voice, but in a different context. We are going to talk about poetry. I don't know what is there is a long title of this session. I don't remember. What's that? art of poetry, perception, perspectives, and profoundness. So the first line is important, the art of poetry. So, and with me, three major poets of the country. Dr. Asutosh Parida, he is a Odia poet, a scientist, but very important voices from Odisha, a very strong political voice, a strong poetic voice, at the same time, a very strong political voice. And in my left, Arundhati Subramaniam, another very, very important and very popular poets of the country. And Mani, of course, Mani Rao, we have listening her since yesterday, a very popular poet. So it's a very interesting combination. Astos Farida is explicitly political. And Arundhati is subtle but spiritual. So also money. So balancing these two sides, one is very explicitly political. So what is your art and how you approach politics in poetry? I will ask you this question because I always love one line by the great poet Mukti Bodh. Everybody to whom he meets, he asks, partner, तुम्हारी politics क्या है? What is your politics? So, what is your art of poetry and what is your politics of poetry? Let me start with Mani.
Actually, I don't think I have ever been overt in my earlier work about my politics. And whenever people asked me what I thought, I said that I enact it in my life. It's not so much about the saying of it, but I was never wanting to embrace any label of a feminist or those kind of positions because I said that my fight has been in my life. And so I don't need to speak about it. I speak it every day. More recently, though, I have been articulating some of those problems in my poetry, which is a lot more narrative and overt. So I would say that's like a little bit of a shift in my writing. So I would say I was more subtle before, but now I'm a little bit more comfortable to write about something as a point to make. I can maybe read you a poem or something as an example, maybe just a very short 2-3 line.
Yeah, you can.
Okay. So,
in the poetry that you were reading yesterday, I found it a little bit political.
okay. Okay. So, this is called Waiting for Gold. We all know that there's been a lot of talk about how in the golden age, women were treated so well. They were equal to men, etc. This is called Waiting for Gold. Long, long ago, very, very long ago, when this star was in that constellation, men and women were equal. Cobbler could be king. According to Surya Siddhanta, the golden age will return when planets line up along the ecliptic in Pisces just before Aries on a new moon day in Phalguni. Quote this poem then.
That's beautiful. So, Arundhati, I found your poems, it will be very naive or it will be very simplistic to say that's spiritual poem. But there are many nuances, many shades, and many commentaries, I would say. So how would you see your art of poetry and your politics of the poetry?
Wow, it's not easy to be discussing politics first thing after breakfast. But let me say that I think, firstly, about the spiritual part of things, I'm not sure that my work is spiritual in terms of the poetry. A lot of my prose has, in fact, been around sacred traditions. But my poetry, as I see it, is not about the sacred as much as I think my spiritual journey has affected the way in which I write. The how has changed. And that is clearly evident, I think, in the poetry. About the political angle, I think I was aware, I'm thinking about my very first book, which happened in 2001, where I think I was aware that even making a choice, like writing about what it meant to travel in a peak hour Bombay local train, I was fully aware then that just by writing something like that, one was making a small but significant political choice. You were not talking about the 450 from Paddington. You were talking about the Andheri local train. This itself, I was aware, had its own political implications. And I found, I mean, always cultural politics and gender politics, this is part of our lives. And as my niece says, when something is part of your life, it will percolate into everything you do. The art is one part of it, but it will percolate. You cannot keep them separate. You're not sitting there saying, putting on my mantle and saying, now I will be political. This is who you are. You don't have a choice. So to be self-consciously political, which is the joke I was making about being political post-breakfast, that's another matter. It was not something I aspired to be, but to be consciously political, certainly, not self-consciously. Having said that, I'll also say that when I encountered a particular critic after my first book actually, who raised the question of, he said, you know, this is fine poetry, but is it identifiably Indian? I remember then deciding that sometimes one has to forego the luxury, perhaps, of ambivalence in poetry. And sometimes one has to counter a gatekeeper by turning into a gatekeeper oneself and saying, this far and no further. You will not define who I am. You're free to define who you are, but you will not define who I am. And so there was a long rage poem called To the Welsh Critic Who Doesn't Find Me Identifiably Indian, which is a particular kind of rage. In my most recent book, though, I think I found a shift happening. The poems, there is an emphatic poem called Song for Catabolic Women, which is about, you know, women deciding that they will no longer allow other people to define, women of a certain age who are happy to be in their own bodies, at ease in their own skins. But to me, it's not a rage poem. It's much more of an anthem. So I think there's perhaps been a shift recognizing that there is a way to turn rage into celebration, and that can be just as political.
That's the reality, actually. You know, your race is the anthem. And when you're celebrating and when you're talking about your body, your time, your age, your place, so certainly you are political. So there is, manage a political animal, that proverbial line. Now to Asuda. Asutosh Parida is, he writes about politics, but he is an artist. He does not shout. His protest poems are like, a crafted piece of words. So how you see politics in your poetry there?
Thank you, Kedar. You have started with a very heavy topic like politics and poetry. I just remember decades back when I was a student in IIT Kharagpur, I came across a book brought out by Penguin India. And the name of the book was The Penguin Book of Socialist Verses. And it has included poets starting with Neruda and all the worldwide poets who believed in socialism. And that in that introduction of that book, I think the name of the compiler was Max Brod. he gave a comment about politics and poetry. He told that a political matter, I don't exactly remember the words, a political matter that way can have some draw some immediate attention. But unless the political matter is humanized, it doesn't have any value, literary value. That means when you project politics as such, without humanizing it, then it doesn't become poetry or doesn't become literature. So in that sense, what Kedar told, that explicitly putting up politics is not the nature of literature. It should be implicit, more I will say. And that way, there is always a relationship between man and politics, society and politics, because like religion, literature, politics is also a form of social consciousness, and there is a very fine relationship between politics and literature, and how they influence each other in a very subtle manner, not very directly or openly like that. So how a literature will assimilate the contemporary politics and how it will express it, it is up to the poet how he has assimilated the social reality. So that is why those who are politically conscious poets, and one of the form is protest poetry and other things. It is protest poetry is everywhere. Feminists also, they are writing protest poetry. But when the poet will express it, so we'll talk more of the social reality. How we'll depict that reality. And in the process of depicting the contemporary reality, we'll bring out the question of politics there. And politics will be implicit in that protest, or in the process of unraveling the contradictions of our social reality. So that is how I see it.
In that context, how do you see poems like Pataka Ullahanai or Apsachi Rautra and others? You know, your people to whom you really admire, they are very political poets, and
Yes,
and you are also, though you never say that you are a Marxist, but you are associated with many Marxist movements, protests, and organizations.
That's true. Because a poet has to cannot write sitting inside the drawing room. If you write about politics, about people, you have to some extent, you have to assimilate, you have to connect themselves with the people. Otherwise, and you have to go to them. Actually, we are not able to go to them. We should see on the spot, on the field, how the people's struggle is going on. They may not be very political, but they are struggling, they are protesting for their own survival. So that way, it has a great influence on the writer, a sensitive writer, if he goes there. And he has to become a part of that. Though it is not always possible to do it, people like us. But whenever the chance comes, better to a writer should take that chance and be with the people. And it will influence, definitely it has an impact, it will have an impact on his poetry. But about Sachi Rautra, when he wrote, Sachi Rautra wrote Pataka Ullahanai, that was very famous because at the time of the collapse of Soviet Union, and when the red flag was brought down and all that, he was very sensitive towards that, though by that time he has left his ideology. Sachi Rautra abandoned his own ideology by 60s, and he went on to modernism. So he was no more a revolutionary or no more a Marxist, whatever you call it.
It was like Sartre is talking about his own identity as a
But
Marxist.
question is, this very event might have revived his suppressed or whatever his nostalgia for that revolutionary spirit. And he brought out that piece of writing, and because it came out in a newspaper, and many people like him might have felt, those who have a lot of, what you can say, attachment towards a socialist world, might have felt rather disheartened. So they like that poem. But that is a political poem, no doubt, but it has a high artistic quality. I think that he has expressed. That is the reason why it became so popular, the very piece of poem.
Okay, now it's a completely different set of questions. No, this is, when we are talking about the art of poetry, is it true that a poet is basically autobiographical? Does he or she writes about himself or herself only? Or even if she writes about something someone other, that is an extension of his own self. Is it so? Or do you have another perception, or do you have a different understanding of poetry?
I think whether you draw from your own life or whether you put yourself in somebody's shoes or you imagine you're speaking on behalf of somebody, it's not going to work unless you actually experience it in your imagination and you realize it. So to make it real, you have to catch the reality of it, the grain of it. You have to almost embody it. So one draws from one's own life, and one also draws from whatever lives you have imagined and put yourself in. Autobiography is also not necessarily always accurate, because you're not telling your autobiography. You're picking from it in order to then transform it into a different point or the artistic reality. So it's a little bit foolish sometimes for the reader to automatically ask a question. Like, for example, that poem I read yesterday, the first poem on the mother. So I have had people at the end who have come up to me and said, "Is your mother okay?" And I don't even know how to react to that, because I was not there telling a story about my personal life. Now, whether that actually happened or not, I am not obliged to share that with the audience. And neither should they come back and ask me if, taking that literally. So I think there has to be some space in which we can draw from our own life as if it was another person's life, and we can draw from any life as if it was our own.
Okay, Mr. Arundhati. So, the same question, but in a different context, you can say. So that the personal and the universal. So what is personal and what is universal? And how you approach a poetry. Suppose whether it's a personal feelings or something universal feelings, or it's a feelings which is completely alien to you, that you are bringing something different from a different world. How do you see that actually?
I'm trying to find a way to answer this without getting too abstract, because we are talking in the abstract. A lot of this is actually worked out in the making of a poem. I'd say, as an extension from what Mani pointed out, I'd say that there's a great deal of truth in fiction and a great deal of fiction in truth. And once we see that, we also realize that there is really no way to be universal without being intensely local. And there is really no way to be local without, in some way, as you begin to deepen your understanding. I think this is the great insight of the lyric poem, that the more intensely and the more deeply you engage in the here and the now, the more you touch the universal. So you don't really have to try. I think the problem sometimes is that we try too hard to be universal. As I often say when I work, when I'm doing poetry workshops, people are in a hurry sometimes. I believe, I did this too. People are in a hurry very often to underscore the relevance of their work. When in fact, very often, if you deeply inhabit this moment in your life, it will lead you and will lead your reader inevitably to something larger. So without trying too hard, I think the trying too hard is often the problem. And I believe that the lyric poem, time and again, as a reader, it has led me to places that I'd never imagined. Many of us, when we grew up reading about skylarks and daffodils, believed we had to write about skylarks and daffodils to touch other people. When in fact, what one begins to realize gradually is that in the act of recording this intensely unremarkable event, just an everyday flower, this particular poet found his way to something much larger. You have to find your own way to that something much larger. It can never be a second-hand journey. It can never happen because someone else made that journey. It has to be processed through your own body, through your own sensibility, and then perhaps, if you're lucky, you stumble upon it.
Yeah, in mystic Odia poetry tradition, we have two very intense words: Pinda and Brahmanda. So this body is your Pinda, and Brahmanda is within. So how you extend yourself, how you enlarge yourself, it's up to you. How you look at the Brahmanda within this limited Pinda is the strength of you, and that is poetry. So now going to Asuda, so how you see the person and the universe, whether they are fighting with each other, contradicting each other, or cooperating with each other in your poetry.
Actually, naturally, in a society, there will be a contradiction or a conflict between the individual and the multitude. Because the individual is not always satisfied with the world around him. And so there is a conflict. But there is a unity also because the man lives in a society and he has to make some compromises and cooperations because that is how the world moves. Because a man, I'm telling I can tell otherwise because nowadays they are using the female ranger, her, not him. Anyway, I'm habituated to that. A man cannot live by himself, cannot collect his subsistence of life himself. So he has to go in association with the other people in the society. So he has to live in a society. But in that process, he faces conflicts and also cooperation, both. But when you come to poetry, the experiencing poetry, poetry is definitely starts with a subjective field, and because the poet has to feel first as an individual. And what he can write, the poet can write as an individual, his own experiences, his own internal conflicts, everything that can be brought out in poetry. But when his experiences will reflect a universal sentiment, then only he can correlate with with others, and it will be taken as a universal statement. And conversely, the poet is not necessarily there because every person in the society has their own experiences, and they express their own stories, own experiences, otherwise in different ways. So the poet discovers those experiences. So one can say that poet is the discoverer of experiences in the society. And he can choose which experience he can assimilate. So he assimilates the experiences of many and internalizes it and then expresses it. That means that is what we say, collecting the experiences, transforming it artistically within poetry, and again give it back to them in the form of poetry. So that is how we understand. At least I understand between the relationship between the individual and the universal. That is how we work and we live.
Yeah, that's the way we condense the multitude. So now the last round, and I think it will be one. Well, and you know, I always love that line of Neruda when he say that poetry gives blood quality to blood, glass quality to glass, and life to life itself. So, but as a poet, we struggle through many identities. Like, we're not very happy with the title poet. Okay, I'm an Indian poet. I'm a feminist poet. I'm a American poet, European poet. I'm a political poet. I'm a protest poet. So, how do you see the divide of these identities as a poet? Mani.
I have an essay called Halloween, in which I talk about all the various masks that are put on different occasions, and how one can slot into different available slots. The taxonomy is really actually the problem on the other side. You write a book, somebody decides whether to put it under crime fiction, historical fiction. I mean, well, of course, you are catering to a genre, but whether the prose you write is in the poetry compartment or in the prose compartment or in Indian or in Asian, those are all classifications that have come in order to make things easier for people to know, for people to study. Usually something has to be hijacked and placed in a particular place with a box so that everybody can then study that and gather expertise on that. But when you're producing it, you're not creating the category. You are just expressing yourself, which is a function of all those various elements. How you then face it is when it comes back at you as a reflection. So first you're producing the art, then the world receives it, and then that image comes back at you. And then you see this image, and whether you recognize it or not, you can smile at it, you can accept it, you can utilize it, you can exploit it, So this is kind of a very interesting dynamic. When I used to live in Hong Kong, I found, for example, that if anybody invited a Chinese poet to a festival, of course they're going to call a poet with a Chinese face. They're not going to call me, even though I was a Hong Kong permanent resident. In the USA, you'll find a lot of the Indian poets are writing about identity, and they kind of expected to write about identity, and breaking that expectation is also like a point. Here, in fact, I was telling somebody, when I meet someone, they say, "Oh, when did you come back?" And I say, 7 years ago. Oh, I didn't know that, you're Indian. Yes, I'm Indian. I always had an Indian passport. I was born in India. I was raised in India. So I went and lived somewhere else for whatever number of years and come back. So the identity is in their mind. It's not in my mind. And then if we talk about, say, Indian culture or Indology or whatever, then they get very surprised. So how come you know all these things? I'm like, that's my primary interest. That's my primary interest. Oh, so now that whole idea of, but then I never claimed to be that identity that they have in their mind, that is destabilized. And then something else forms, and suddenly it's not a handshake, it's a namaste. So that whole impression has come from there, not from here. And what I have to do is constantly navigate it and negotiate with it. And it's so tiring.
So, so it's tiring. It's very. And how you see, Arundhati, that the conflict of identities, and I know you never go into any identity, never fit into any identity. So how you struggle with, how you encounter this identity question.
I wish we could, yeah.
Like, you know, in the beginning, we were talking about whether you're from Mumbai or from Chennai,
Yes.
whether you're a spiritual writer.
I know.
Or so on.
I know. And I mean, the reason I mentioned that rage poem to the Welsh critic is because it was my way of saying, I really don't know how to be Indian, but I know whether I like it or not, indefinably, that's who I am. And I really don't care for you coming here and defining what it is to be Indian, because I know whether I like it or not that I am. That's all it is. Likewise about being woman, likewise about belonging to a particular faith or, what have you at this moment in time. Are you traditional? Are you contemporary? These questions really matter more to the questioner. They matter very little to the person inhabiting the self, as we know. We all know this. I remember being very empowered when I first read Borges say in his Harvard lectures. He says that, people keep asking me, are you, what about being contemporary? And he said, the point is, whether we like it or not, we are contemporary. We may spend our time yearning to have lived in a certain moment in the past, but even that is a yearning that happens from here. So whether we like it or not, we are here, we are now. The question is, from this here and now, where do I want to branch out? How do I want to branch out? So I think, how does one negotiate this? Periodically, you write a rage poem to a Welsh critic, and the rest of the time, most of the time, you spend being yourself and discovering yourself and inventing yourself and wearing yourself differently on different days, perhaps. But this is a journey of discovery. It is unfortunate, and I feel this goes back to my endless issue with the way in which poetry is taught. Everyone in school, I remember, all of us as children, responded effortlessly to poetry. Later on came the question, what is the poem trying to say? And as soon as that question was asked, what is the poet trying to say? It filled all of us with a kind of gloom, because we didn't know what the poet was trying to say, but we knew we could respond to the poem. And a poem is never trying to say something. A poem is saying it. And I think if we were encouraged to allow ourselves to trust that experiential dimension, what do I experience when I hear the poem? Not what category, what pigeonhole can I slot the poet. I've understood a poem because this poet is a feminist. I've understood this poem because this poet is spiritual. I've understood this poem because this poet is a Dalit, whatever, what have you. The point is, these are categories and labels that come afterwards to make life easy for a particular unimaginative tribe of academic. Thankfully, not all academics are unimaginative. That's not what I'm saying. But there's a particular kind of journalist or academic, and perhaps we've all been guilty of this at some point, a particular kind that wants an easy label. But to fit their easy labels, I don't think we need to craft ourselves, because we'd be spending a lot of our time really wasting our lives trying to fit into other people's definitions of ourselves when we still have we actually have very little time to find out who we are. There has to be a great urgency about that journey. And I hope that's the journey I'm on, the journey of trying to find out who I am, not the journey of trying to please someone else with a label that will make life easier for them.
Okay, that's very, very fascinating and very clear, actually. So now the last question to Astos Parida. So how, I think, do you really encounter when you go to US nowadays, you are every year you are going to US, or you are meeting people. Do you find this leveling or this identity question is a very important point in Odia poetry.
Actually, this identity question has not haunted me very much in that sense, because I have not looked at poetry in that way. But I have a mother tongue. I have learnt it from my childhood, and I love my mother tongue as much I love my mother. So there is nothing great about it. To be so patriotic or so to be so proud or something like that. Because it is something very natural that everybody has a mother tongue and everybody loves it and feels good about it. So far the poetry is concerned, because I have a mother tongue, and I read my past the poets of our great poets. I read them out of my fascination to learn the language, and I also learned in the process that how beautiful and how spectacular are their poetry. I have read Radhanath Rai, since Radhanath Rai or Bhima Bhoi or Sarala Das, even the modern poets. And whenever I read them this in Oriya, so I felt that like any other language, my language has also a specific identity, and I am a part of that. So I wrote in that process, in that language only. So I have not got much chance to go outside in Odisha, but I have read the poetry of other languages also, in other Indian languages, and some of the poetry of the other countries in English translation and great poets. All these things have come in the process of my learning writing poetry. So this identity question, I have seen in that process there is a universality. So far the poetry is concerned, because when Neruda writes in Latin America, and when Anandamurthy writes in Karnataka, in Kannada, we can find a lot of similarity between their approaches, their attitudes. So like that we can compare many poets worldwide, that their thinking process, because they are after all human beings and they are facing the human conditions, how this world is moving and how the people's thinking process is going on, how this process of the evolution of human consciousness is reacting to the present realities. So in that process, so I have not felt much concerned about my own identity. Identity means that I am a Oriya. I'm not very conscious that I am a Oriya, but I write in Oriya language. That's simple as that.
One very, very pointed question to you, that when you are asked, your very famous poetry Chandala, it's about the plight of a Chandal. And you are being questioned by the Dalit poets that you are writing about Dalit identity without being a Dalit. This question has haunted you and many of us. So how do you respond to that?
Actually, when I wrote this poems, series of poems, actually, I will just admit that this Chandal as a Dalit was not is not in the picture. So I had an image that there is a person, and there it is a Smasan Ghat, that is crematorium. A person is burning dead bodies. Because that is what the Chandals they do, and what Harishchandra, when he became a Chandal, he was doing that job also. So there is a dead body, and the Chandal is burning the bodies, corpses. and of women, of children, of rich people, kings, and all these things. Chandal is doing all these jobs. So there, the Chandal is telling that I have burnt my own, burning my own brain there also. So like that, some pictures came about that. Then when I thought about that particular identity of that person, then I have another impression. That's in the background of Indian society. When our progressive writers, they talk of the proletariat. And the proletariat concept has been, even still it is there. So I thought, this is the real proletariat. So far the Indian society is concerned. If you find trying to search out the proletariat in India, it is the Chandal. So that time actually I was not very conscious about, I didn't know what is Dalit poetry is. So Chandal was a antithesis of the hegemonic Indian society. It was a challenge to their established norms. So that way I have conceived that Chandal.
Okay.
So afterwards, when Dalit poetry came into existence and people started writing Dalit poetry and people discussed, because the name of the book was Chandal or the name of the poems were Chandal, so they identified it with the Dalit poetry.
Dalit poetry movement,
But and some of the pictures or images I have used in Chandal belong to the Dalit situation.
that is very
So that's
natural and obvious. Yeah. So thank you very much. Before concluding, I remember a line of a tribal poet, a major tribal poet in Odia, Bhima Bhoi, and he say, ଏକ ଖଣ୍ଡ ହାଡ଼ ବୁନ୍ଦାଏ ରୁଧିର ଫୁଟେ ମାଉଁସ ଜାଣଇ ତେଣୁ କରି ସିନା ପ୍ରାଣୀଙ୍କ ବିକଳ ସହି ନ ପାରୁଛି ମୁହିଁ. I know the man is nothing but a piece of bone, a pound of flesh, and a drop of blood. And I can never tolerate somebody's suffering. That's why I'm writing. So for me, the art of poetry is all about that. I write because I cannot see people suffering. So that was Bhima Bhoi. So I think you all agree with that point. And thank you, Mani, Arundhati, and Asuda. So Arundhati is a long time friend, reading together for last 2 decades on many occasions. Mani is for the first time I'm meeting her, but it's good that we are reading together. And Asuda is our mentor, our guide, and he is always there with us. So thank you very much for this wonderful session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, speakers. For the next session, Fictionalizing Realities, I would like to invite Sumit Sharma Samir, Himanshu Shekhar Mahapatra, Deepika Mukherjee, along with the moderator Ashwini Kumar. Please have a huge round of applause for all of them.
This session was supposed to be at a later time.
Because Ashwini is not here. Ashwini is yet to come.
Not
Okay,
this is
sir,
at 3:45.
But
This is at 3:45.
okay, sir, I was
You took me unaware.
yeah. So it was scheduled for the, I think, for around 4 o'clock. We get the notification that it is scheduled today.
Yeah, but then you shared the final schedule, which showed that the session is at 3:45.
So it was rescheduled actually.
Without our knowing.
Okay, sir.
So what do you have now?
What to do?
If you allow, I'll call Ashwini sir to.
Is the moderator the only person missing?
Yes.
Everybody else is here. Then we just need another moderator, you know? Can you
Yes.
get somebody to do this? Yeah.
Sorry for the inconvenience. We are waiting for 5 minutes. It's a pause.
Huh?
Something like is he doing something else?
Both the panelists can talk to each other and we can listen.
Oh, okay, he's already there. Yes, then. Yeah, I was just, no problem. Hi, Aaron, the thing, I don't think we've met, to become Richie. Hello to you. I'm looking forward to, are you on? Yes, I am, well, which is why I think I'll keep that going. Just hold forward, I don't know if you- Yeah, oh, well, we'll see how it goes, yeah.
Oh, so I think they should just start. I'm glad you said all the things that you did about your resolutions about festivals, all of which should stand even while we attend festivals.
Yes, of
We
course.
need to have this meeting
Yeah,
this
that's
time. And the other thing that I'm glad you talked about was your, yes, was the video enter translation.
Yeah. There's no class. Very
I can moderate this session as well. Do you want me to moderate this session as well as speak to this? And then also see how journeys happen. Then we okay. All right. Okay. All right.
The in olden times, even the chatukars.
Yeah,
The translator is a form of chatukar, the established
yeah.
writers.
Yeah, that you talked about.
It was very blunt today.
It's important, it's usually things that are not under one's breath. It's important to talk about.
Yeah.
He was very blunt today and he's going to favor it.
Who's going to make it pay?
He's going to favor it.
Who's going to make it pay?
No, let the concept
But if it's not a word on his eyes to be part of,
Ladies and gentlemen, respected speakers, till Ashwini sir come over here, like he's on his way, can we have an open mic for at least 5 minutes? If anyone is interested, if you're writing something, whether a poetry or anything, I would request you to come over here.
Okay, I'm talking to someone about a question she had. Let's just do another.
Anyone from the audience want to come over here to narrate their poem, to speak about their poem or anything? Anyone? I really hope that someone will come over here to speak about it.
It's a completely interactive session. You all should feel free to join us.
but you have a speaker there who's willing to start. Why don't you start?
Okay. No, but I don't. I mean, I was suggesting I say some of my poetry.
Ma'am wants to answer some
questions. I know.
Okay, ma'am. Then you can start a Q&A with you.
Oh, but yes, this young lady has a question. So
Okay,
yeah,
ma'am, definitely.
Yeah, let me.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Ankriti Pal and I'm here from Kolkata. So my question to ma'am is that what led you write one specific book of yours? And the book I'm talking about, it's it really made me think a lot, dive deeper into my thoughts. And I'd just like to ask what made you write the dialect of I just forgot.
Distant harbors.
Yeah, dialect of distant harbors.
Thank you. Thank you, Ankriti. That's a lovely question. For those of you who have not read The Dialect of Distant Harbors, this is a poetry collection that I published with Kevin Carey Press in New Jersey in 2023. I'm surprised that you've been able to get it here because it was priced at some ridiculous 900 rupees at the Bangalore Literary Festival, which I felt very bad about, but that's what happens when you publish in the US and books come here. The Dialect of Distant Harbors was actually a poetry collection that I've been writing for many years. I am still very much Indian. I haven't given up my Indian citizenship, although I have lived abroad for about 35 years. And my father was a diplomat. So my book of travel essays, which is the book I'm launching later today, is about a life of travel. But before that, before anything else, came poetry, because every 3 years or 2 years we'd be moving with my father and then just with my job. And I felt that poetry kept me rooted. It was something that came very naturally. And I wrote The Dialect of Distant Harbors, titling it The Dialect of Distant Harbors, because it's also a kind of a love letter to Bangla, which is my mother tongue. And as Arundhati just, as we just heard in the poetry thing just a while back, I'm sorry. Okay. It's very much, when you're writing in America, you're asked about identities and things. And I just wanted to write a poetry book that was almost bilingual, because there's a lot of Bangla, there is some Malay, there is a lot of Pantuns in there, because I've lived for a very long time and loved living in Malaysia and Singapore. So it's very much a bilingual collection. So I wasn't sure how it would do in America, but thankfully it's doing fairly well, and it won some little award somewhere. But the main thing is that I've had a lot of young people like you, Ankriti, coming and telling me that the fact that I've done this in different languages has given them a template for writing their own words, not just in English, not just in a Shakespearean or an English lit English, but in the code switched dialects that they actually speak. So by code switching, I mean when you use more than one language when writing. So I have to say that what led me to write this is, first of all, to just express myself the way that I wanted to, instead of the way that people thought that poets should write. And secondly, it really is a love letter to Bangla and the other languages that are not English and very often subdued by English. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Yeah.
Are you in this panel as
Yes,
well?
I am.
Okay, who's the third person? Sunil something?
Yes. We're changing the schedule very frequently.
I know.
Yes. Sumit Sharma Sir.
Is he here?
Thank you, ma'am, for the response.
Yeah. Are we rescheduling? Okay. After the lunch. Okay. I have another panel just before lunch as well. So if that's clashing, then I can't give vote.
That is not.
Okay.
So what is
We are rescheduling after lunch.
after lunch?
Yes, yes.
So moving towards the next session, converting innovation into a startup, I would like to invite our speakers,
Lovely to hear you. Thank you.
Devendra Mohanta sir, Mishuhori Iwanga sir, Ki Yamaguchi sir, and Sudhir Dash, along with the moderator, Ma'am Priyanka Thatoy. Please welcome them with a huge round of applause.
And I'm on a book tour with Writers Test. So in 5 days, I have an event in Amsterdam and then in Geneva. So I'm doing the book tour.
Where in Chicago?
In Chicago, yes.
Yeah, I visit the United States basically to visit with my doctor.
Okay, which part of the US?
North Carolina.
Oh, lovely.
Holly
Yeah.
Springs.
Oh, okay. I will be at Greensboro, which is,
Really?
in that region.
Yeah.
And my son lives in Durham,
So
which is not far.
I'll take you to it.
Absolutely. Yes, yes. No, there are 5.
Moderators.
Yeah. Yeah.
So can you come out?
I would request everyone to keep your phone on silent and disable the notification option.
All right. So my name is Priyanka, and a little shift in the gear from the books and poetry. Maybe we move towards the startups and the corporates. Um, my voice is a little low. Maybe I'm too overwhelmed to have people around me who are so talented, come from different countries, and are here to share the knowledge. To start with, I think we all know here, and I see a lot of young faces over here. The word startup itself clears a click in your mind. It's something innovative, something new, something you always want to do, and maybe each one of us at some point of time we all wanted our startups or our companies to be there. So to start with, in a country where startup culture is actually picking up, we have TV shows, we have influencers, we have celebrities talking about it. And with this wonderful panel that I have around, my first question will be, in the journey of startups that we have seen from, say, 2010 till 2024, anything that has happened recently which changed your perspective of how a startup works? Would you like to start?
Yeah. So thank you. Yeah. So it is a good question. Yeah. Audible. Yeah.
The mic is working? Yes.
Yeah. So if you see last 12 years or 13 years, the major thing, whatever the startup ecosystem, what the changes, one thing what I have noticed, of course, Iwanaga-san, Yamaguchi-san, and myself, my experience is in and around Japan. Of course, I work closely with India and US. Last 20 years, my base location is Tokyo. But however, I have seen what are the things change in different global perspective. In India, one of the things is earlier we thought a business person's son or relatives can only start the business, and that concept got changed. And anybody is having any idea or in the college, a lot of entrepreneurships are being encouraged, and a lot of, for example, IIT, NIT, they started around 25 years industry consultancy, and that is how they involve third year, fourth year, or PhD students, and those things. The last 12 years, it has gone into each and every large and small colleges. So that is one major thing. So from the engineering days, they think they can do some business. So that is a one major change I can see in India. However, in Japan, that thing is a bit slow, and in US also similar culture is there 20 years before. And apart from that, Japan, what they think from Japan perspective, I can tell, and Iwanaga-san and Yamaguchi-san can add. One of the things they look for is before starting, they look for at least 3-4 years. What are the things customers looking for? What are the cultural issues, challenges there? Because if you are from foreign country, some ideas is coming. What are the impacts? So they at least do 2-3 years. Unlike in India, we quickly do a pilot and try to implement anything. If we fail, then I can move around. Basically, Japan, it is not like that. They have step by step. And for example, for us, the duration is like 6 months might be in Japan. It might be almost 2 years. So Iwanaga-san and Yamaguchi-san can add some additional points. And Iwanaga-san has a startup almost 20 years back from 3 people, how he has grown his company in Japan from one of the large, primarily focusing on the medical device product dealerships, and how he has grown his company. Yeah. Iwanaga-san and Yamaguchi-san.
My name is Iwanaga Mitsuhiro. Yeah. Sorry, Japanese speaking.
Yeah, so he will speak in Japanese. So some of the key points I'll translate into English. Yeah.
Thank you. ブバネシュワはとても綺麗な街で、2回目なんです。来させてもらいましたのが。すごく、今は、季節も良くって、すごく、ハッピーです。
So Bhubaneswar is a very nice city, and this is his second visit to Bhubaneswar, and he likes it. The weather is this time very good. Last time he came in May, so it was very hot. Yeah.
今の日本の状況なんですけれども、今日本は超高齢化社会というふうに呼ばれています。3人に、今1人は、60歳以上、もうあと10年15年するとですね、3人に2人が、60歳以上というとても年寄りの国になります。
So in Japan, you might be knowing, so that is one of the world's developed country. But there is an aging population. So currently almost 35% people are above 65 plus. Okay. And down the line, the number of people in that category will be close to almost 65-70% who will be 65 plus. And there will be a huge need for resources for their current operations, including automotive, electronics, IT, all the industries. They need people from outside. はい。
そのためにですね、日本で、人材が若い人たちがいないので、今、ベトナムとかフィリピンとか、マレーシアとかいろんな国から日本に、働きに来てもらうという取り組みが進んでいます。ただ、インドの人たちにはまだ、日本に来ていただくという、まだそういう例がですね、すごく少ないように感じていました。
So still the number of people from India are very limited in Japan. Already Vietnam, Thailand, from those countries, a lot of earlier it was China. A lot of people had come and they're working and supporting Japan ecosystem. And definitely India has a big chance.
その中でですね、今までは労働力として、そういう他の国の人たちに来ていただくということが必要だったんですけれども、これからは、もっと IT とか、いろんなイノベーションを起こしていただくために、インドの人たちに、私はぜひ日本に来ていただきたいと思っております。で、そして、日本で、いろんなことを感じたことをインドに持ち帰っていただくと、すごく今後、インドと日本が、すごくこういい関係で、つながっていくというふうに思っています。
Whatever the learnings Japan has and whatever from the innovation and other point of view, so people can go there, learn, and they can bring. At the same time, India is having some of the key things in their industry, might be in software and other things. So they can bring it to Japan. That way the collaborations will be very strong.
そういう、日本ならではの、アニメーションとか、フードとか、そういうものをぜひ、日本に学びに来ていただいて、それをインドでスタートアップにつなげていただけると、すごく私たちも嬉しいですし、皆さんもハッピーになれるのではないかというふうに考えています。以上です。
Hi. So different, like a lot of things which are not focused, like for example, food and some of the gaming industry, some of the things from Japan, you can bring it to India, and in those industry, definitely Japan also will be benefited, and it will be new for India as well. Yamaguchi-san.
My name is Kei. Also, I already 4 times in the Barcelona, and I had a lot of discussion with a university student. and also the literacy point of view, that sense or emotion that I had already the 20 years global company, and I first visited in India. The Mumbai is at almost 20 years back, and first side is I difficult to communicate in English, but your side is Indian member to the very kindness for me to understand that Japanese is difficult to speaking English, but they try to understand. What mean that sometimes literacy is a very precise or detailed, but my point of the one of the part of literacy is that each other try to understand each other's language or meaning is contents that depend on situation. So that is a key word is, sometimes the language is no need to like testing. So we are broken. My English is anyway broken, but maybe you might be understand what I want to say. So first, to this session is from Japan, is that please don't hesitate with the language barrier first. So therefore, my message is that please try to come to Japan, the 1 week or 2 weeks with Iwano-san's company or our associate, the support program. So then, once you come to Japan, you see yourself to the what is culture or what is language, and startup is very good opportunity really in Japan, because IT or digital or technology is very low, because now so many elderly people, they difficult to understand your generation the technology, however they want to use. So your ages is really opportunity to come to Japan and working both us like us to the doesn't matter the communication the level, but please motivated and come to Japan, and also sometime you back to India, then you are like a startup company each other to discussing, and IT is so many potential for the adapting the, for example, food business, medical device business, hospital business, or animation. So you don't focusing the only IT technology is a IT company. You focusing the your skill of IT technology to the another industry. That is food device by multiply IT. That is your originate. Then this is the startup products very how to say potential the growing. Also you support our society, the Japan. So that's today first I want to give you the young generation in India. So that's my point. Sorry, maybe question is maybe all different.
No
but
problem. The key message is here. So Japan perspective you should tell.
so this is Japan, very perspective that I don't know the US or Europe, but this is like a Japanese culture, one of the part. Yeah.
Well, Iwanga-san and Yamaguchi-san, what you spoke in Japanese, I have half understood that, because I was uniquely placed in a sense that I was the first employee of SMBC, the biggest Japanese bank. In fact, I was the one who was responsible for bringing them to India. Yep. Right. So for obtaining them the banking license. So I have more than 100 Japanese friends. And like before giving my opening speech, not speech, the opening lines, remarks. So I think I would set some the context. The topic of today's this session is innovations, converting innovation into startup. So when you speak about startup, generally it is understood as startup is perhaps a business, right? Representatively it is true, exhaustively it is not, because every startup can be a business, but all business are not necessarily a startup. Why I'm saying this, if every business is a startup, then perhaps the oldest, the biggest, and the most popular startup could have been the East India Company. Right? The magnificent amount of business they were doing all across the globe, right? So the Britishers, they also formed a company called as the East India Company, and they have done tremendous business throughout the world. But are we even thinking about calling them a startup? Answer is no. A very big no. Why? Because hardly any social issues or a problem statement the world or a community are facing, they have solved. No, they have looted, right? In a sense of accumulating wealth and business fortune, they have employed a whole lot of people. They have enlarged their business empire almost to the entire globe. But have they solved any issues in any part of the world? Answer is no. Right? So they were not a startup. So when we are talking about startup, then of course there is a social issue or a problem statement is there in the cornerstone, and we want to solve this through a mechanism by creating a peripheral business environment, and we want to solve that issue. Of course, creating employment, getting into bigger demography, right, and earning profit for sustainability is certainly the objective of a startup, right? So the right word has to be creating a startup and solving the social issues or the problem statement through a process called as innovation should be the context. So you cannot convert an innovation into a startup, because innovation is a food for thought, right? So innovation is a key ingredient, right? It's an enabler for converting a social issue or a problem statement through a mechanism. I call it the startup. So perhaps if I was in charge, I would have framed the topic to call creating the problem into a startup through a mechanism called as innovation, right? So I'm not finding grammar into it. So I just want to set the context right? So when we talk about innovation, the innovation not necessarily are technology, right? And with a lot of confidence in my command, because I'm also sitting with a co-panel from Japan, there cannot be better innovative people than our Japanese counterpart. I have worked in a lot of the Japanese culture and Japanese company. When we talk about innovation, so normally what sticks to our mind is perhaps we are talking about technological upgradations. It is, of course, part of it. But when you call about innovation, innovation can be technology, can be R&D, can be process, can be culture, right? So why our Japanese friends are so successful in business? Because they are innovative in all fronts. The moment you enter into a Japanese company, right, small or a giant one, you will find a defined process is already in place. Starting from the 4th grade employee to their CEO, all of them follow, right? Even they have defined processes how to throw a dust material into the dustbin. You cannot throw a piece of paper here and there. No. In a Japanese company, it is taken very seriously. So that is also part of innovation, right? So why do we need innovation? Number one, because again, another point I would really prefer to highlight, what distinguishes between a business and a startup business, right? So I think a few of you must have heard when we used to talk about business. What are you doing? I'm doing BTech. What do you want to do? If you have to be interviewed by your parents, okay, once I finish my BTech, I want to do some business. No, you should get into some job market, right? So earlier we all used to go for academy or our skill acquisitions for the purpose of getting a job, not to create a job, right? But when you talk about startup, definitely for sure what clicks your mind is, I want to be a job creator, not a job seeker, right? So that is on the forefront. So when you talk about startup, the first and very fundamental thing has to be that, yes, not doing the business in its traditional way, in the sense that you have to wait till the flag end of 3 years or 5 years or 7 years just to be called that you are a successful businessman. So when you create a startup, everything is well defined. you want to know what is your concept, the proof of concept, has it been piloted or not, right? What is the time zone? When you want the investor to come into board, everything is well defined, right? So what really defines a startup or distinguishes a startup from a normal business for me is only two things: speed and scalability. Right from the word go, you understand very legibly, very clearly at what speed I want to make my idea on ground and totally successful. When I say successful, the speed and the scalability and the sustainability. These are the 3S that distinguishes a startup from any ordinary business. That is the opening lines.
Thank you so much. I think it was wonderful listening to all the perspectives. My second question, because we have heard from all of us, and it has always been intriguing on why certain places startup is a success and why certain places it is not. So going back to the Japan story, and Devendra sir, because you perfectly bridged the Indian and Japanese part, my question is, what is the reason of Japanese startups being successful? Is it the ecosystem or it is individual brilliance? Sir, would you like to take it?
Hello. Yeah, so hello. Yeah. So one of the things what I have observed is always customer centricity is their main thing. Okay, whenever they innovate anything, what the customer or the ecosystem will be benefited. Okay, so that always they see. And if you might have gone to some of the places in Japan or some parts of Southeast Asia, you might have seen there is a company called Toto. So their toiletry, so the innovations they do for the toiletry, it is like a Rafale jet basically. Okay, so a lot of technology is there, such a in a nobody can think of, and it is in a remote part of Japan called Fukuoka, and from there they are doing this, and always they think customer basically. Okay, so what are the things they will be benefited? Small any packaging. If you see, if I bring some chocolate from Japan, the packaging, the way they do, they think how it will be open, and all those things will be there step by step. So nobody can think of in that way. So those things are always customer is at the top of their mind while doing any type of work, and that's why they are successful. Of course, the ecosystem is earlier it was not that conducive in Japan. Last I think 8 to 10 years, slowly they're putting a lot of effort in that direction, specifically in Hong Kong when China took over, and a lot of fintech, financial technologies, and few other companies they want to relocate, and they thought this is a time to innovate their industry, and that's why they are giving a lot of last 10 years, a lot of leverage, might be the space or might be some subsidy, and opening a company within one day, opening an account. Earlier, a lot of difficulty in opening an account. For example, personal account, if you want to open, somebody needs to be guarantor. Foreigner, for example, 20 years back when I went, it was difficult. MUFJ opening an account means it is a big thing, basically. So it is like a status symbol if you have an account in MUFJ those days, because for normal people they will not open the account. And nowadays it is all online, everything. All last 10 years, a lot of changes has happened. And you want to listen more from Iwanaga-san? Sitsuman ga chotto, hai. はいはい、スタートアップは、はい、ちょっとエコシステムかイノベーションか、そのために。はい。
私の会社は、医療機器の、卸の会社を経営してるんです。で、日本は小さい国なんですけれども、サービスを、より細かくするという、こと 気をつけてやってビジネスを始めました。で、どうぞ。
Hi. So regarding his industry, it is medical device industry, but he started with a small and step by step. What are the challenges they observe that, and based on that they make a strategy. And it is not that quickly they started. Always they plan as usual Japan, and then again execute PDCA type plan, do check and act basically. So.
日本というと、ソニーとか、任天堂とか、ホンダ、トヨタとか、スズキとか、大きい会社のイメージがあると思うんですけれども、ほとんどの会社が、スモールカンパニーです。だいたい 90% 以上が、スモールカンパニーです。じゃあ、みんなそういう会社が、どういうことを考えているか。
Hi. So might be all of you might have images about Japan. The companies are all big, okay, but it is not true. So might be 10% companies are like Toyota, Honda, Sony, and all those companies, okay. But 90% are small, medium sector. So, hi.
そういう会社が生き残るために何を考えているかというと、ナンバーワンになることではなくて、オンリーワンになることなんですね。ですんで、私のいる大阪の、どうぞ。
はい。So that 90% company, their main theme or main focus is not to become number one. So
はい。そのオンリーワンになるために。
only one basically. So might be some only one means that should have some competency, core competency.
オンリーワンになるために、私のいる大阪の小さな、スチール工場なんかでは、部品を作ってですね、ロケットの部品にしてもらってる。そこまで精密な、技術を持っている。これが、私たち日本人のオンリーワンだというふうに思っています。
So, for example, in Osaka area, Osaka is around 550 kilometers away from Tokyo. Okay, so some of the companies are there who are in the steel industry, and where they manufacture some small parts. Okay, which will be used in rocket. Okay, and that is only one basically. So,
そういう技術を日本にぜひ学びに来ていただいて。今度はインディアのオンリーワンをスタートアップ、してもらうことが、私たちも、日本で築いてきた技術をインディアで役に立てていただく。逆にインディアの若い人たちのパワーを日本に、借りしていただくというような交流ができればというふうに思っています。
So same know-how, whatever Japan has, slowly, definitely they want to share that only one concept. Already India is doing some of the areas, but some of the areas where they want collaborations, only one, they can support. At the same time, Japan is, as you know, aging populations. So almost, so 60% people will become 65 plus very soon, and they need not only in the innovation, but normal operations also, the people from India. Yeah. Hi, Yamaguchi-san.
So I think that the hospitality is a very unique success factor for any innovation. Why? Because David-san already mentioned is that even any activity or product, first we want to think about users. What they want to use this product, or what they want to use this service. If you stay in the hotel in Japan, what is more comfortable? What's food? What's temperature? Or what's the omotenashi? Do you know omotenashi? Like if your family's birthday, please in advance we get the information. Then surprise, for example. So any product or any idea or any service, most I think Japanese culture is focusing to the you. Not me. Any innovation, first focusing you. That's my
idea.
Well, what our Iwanga-san and Amaguchi-san said, I just have to add a couple of the interjecting lines. So even if you are not forming the part of the one, only 1 out of 100 becomes ultra rich or number one company, right? So even if you are falling under the 99, not on the one, so what innovation definitely for sure is going to be an enabler for you. Number one, you will find loyal customer, the customer loyalty, right? Number two, of course, revenue growth and revenue augmentation. Number three, brand augmentation, right? In a sense, your brand value is going to be enhanced. And number four, crucial and important is, don't forget, there is a word of mouth publicity. If you have got loyal customers, they are going to publicize for you. The PR, the brand building, the marketing. We also sometimes call it in the business world, the internal sales. One customer referring with the other customers. And not to forget, in ODI context, I tell you, there is an old proverbial, which is a very impactful line for the business. They call it Tunda by the Sahasra Kosa. Right? So if your people start doing the marketing for you, you don't need to give the huge TV commercial, hoardings, and other publicity things. And what my Japanese friends also mean, that the collaboration requirement between Japanese entrepreneur and the Indian dividend and the young talent is, of course, there is not the only the tech area, but there are other areas where Japanese and Indians should come together and do impactful work. And I also assure my two Japanese friends, we already are doing great work, right? The Indians and the Japanese together doing. I am privy to a lot of these Japanese companies, and I also closely work with the government agencies. So our metro network and big highway projects, right? So they are done by Hitachi, right? I'm also helping the Hitachi guys, the top-notch guy there. So we are already doing together the great work, and will constantly do great work. The world order soon is going to change, and God bless us. India and Japan will be on the top of the table. Thank you.
Lovely, lovely to listen to all of you. And if I have found my answer to the question I asked, I think it's meticulous planning, attention to details, focus on solving problems uniquely, and the most important factor is hospitality, as he added. Your customer focus, what my people need, am I able to cater to that? I think that is my takeaway. So just to add, now that we have spoken on how startups work, how it is, my observation, maybe a little naive because I've never been an entrepreneur, but why do big companies struggle to innovate while smaller companies find it easier? From your experience, what do you think is the right answer to it?
Yeah, so I worked for 3 large companies before I started my own. So one of the companies is Hindustan Aluminium, Hindalco, so in India. And then HCL Tech, currently number 3 IT service company, close to around $15 billion. And then L&T, of course, I work for L&T Infotech, but in Japan, I was managing their L&T operations, which is very big. So which is again now it will be $25+ billion company. I was vice president there and country head. So what I have seen all 3 companies, the major challenges, the innovations. So across industries, you cannot do because all department will have different approval process and things like that. And for example, Japan related in HCL and L&T, I tried to set up a Japan Center of Excellence, and it took me almost 6-7 years to set up Japan Center of Excellence, in the sense the people needs to be trained on Japanese language, culture, and Japanese tax, legal, and because we do enterprise IT business, both HCL and L&T days, and I wanted to set up a 1,000 member team, okay, because these are big companies and there are opportunities as well. And within that team, we need to customize whatever we are catering to US and other countries for Japan, specifically that accelerator tools and a lot of other things. But it took almost 7 years. In case of smaller company, which I could do within 2 years, less than 2 years, Of course, the size was not 1,000, but almost 150, 200 people I did with my one of the company, and that way it was faster. And their major challenge was the approval. Still the bureaucracy will be there in large companies. For example, signing a agreement, a master service agreement, it goes to the head office. And once upon a time, I was there for a short time in a large, I'll not name that company, and that was a very famous company in India. Many people will be knowing that in IT service means that is very famous company. So there, the one on-site hiring means Japan, I have to hire one person, and the approval will go to the chairman. And then I told that what for I have joined this company. Within 6 months I left that company, and because those delegations were not there. Currently still it is continuing, so that's why it is very difficult to innovate. And incidentally, for me, HCL and L&T, Japan, nobody wants to interfere because it is an unknown territory. That's why I could do something within 7 years. For other people, 20 years, they still struggle. Yeah. Hi.
Actually, after graduated the university, I joined one Japanese pharmaceutical company, is ASI, and the company is focusing the Alzheimer disease drug. Now, also the 1 year back that the new drug launches. So, why Japanese big companies succeeded like this way is that three item. One is that the Gemba means that the field, the focus, which means that any manufacturing site. So we respecting the operator. Operator is watching any quality or some incident. So that's focusing the company is focusing the respecting the operator, the opinion or information. The other is a family culture. So US or Europe is a very more focusing top-down decision. So David-san mentioned, this is sometimes Japanese company difficult to decide it, make a decision is very slow. Meanwhile, why? Because so many discussion the family culture. So Shacho is a president or a manager or operator, but we family culture. I mean, we are together on the table, and if we have a problem, what we resolve? The sitting, talking. So third one is that how to say that so already mentioned top down, not top down culture. We are focusing that Kaizen is you, what do you want to do? So that is, I think, a key factor so far. The Japanese culture was succeeding, in my opinion.
Anything you would like to add?
I think just the only thing, just to give you a straight answer why the big company face difficulty in adopting innovations. When the small struggle to find resources availability and funding availability, that is not the limitation for big company. The big company also has the unique challenges what Devendra-san said, resistance from employee, right? And getting approval through a diplomatic culture that is developed for years. And of course, not to forget resistance from their customers also, because their customers are big customers. Sometimes they also influence your own decisions. So changing the decision is also equally difficult for big companies.
Just to add to it, a segue to what I asked, what do we think innovation is? Is it a systematic approach or it is a culture? What is actually pushing innovation ahead? Devendra sir, would you like to take up?
Yeah, so for my perspective, because I've studied in Japan, always it is more of a step-by-step, whatever you do, innovations. It is not that like more of a big bang, you do this, that will work. Might be, sometimes it works, but most of the times, so there are chances of failure. If you want to take that risk, then you can go for that big bang, whatever innovations. But last 20 years, so that culture, so I'm adapted to step-by-step culture, and keeping that in mind, whatever I do, it is all step-by-step,
My opinion is culture is very important. Like inside the culture is most important the collaboration, that the family culture. Second one is inclusion. Inclusion means that I'm really thinking about this is correct. But if someone is a different opinion, I need to think. Why you think about that different opinion? Because behind the background might be same, but the different opinion. So new innovation is coming to the different situation, or oh, I didn't never think about like that. So therefore, for me, is that the culture inside culture is a collaboration and innovation also encourage. Like sometimes Japanese are very hesitated to speak up. So I'm very nervous now here. But so like encourage or speak up. That's also very important for me. It's a innovation key.
I think just to add, the company should promote what I call the cooperative competitiveness, right? We agree to disagree, right? And also open brainstorming is another thing. And the big company also should open to not just brainstorming, but experimenting. That is how you innovate the already innovations already in place.
Thank you, Sudhir.
I want to contribute here.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Innovation happens in 3 areas: products, processes, and services. Products, processes, and services. In these 3 areas, innovation happens. And we have to be culturally innovative from every angle. Our mother is cooking in the kitchen. How I can make my wife's or mother's life comfortable in the kitchen? That innovation. Okay, I can improve this thing. I can improve this thing. Now sitting here, I just entered. I couldn't make out who's he. So I opened it. I'm just guessing that so-and-so is so-and-so, so-and-so. So innovation is putting the name tallies here in front of everybody. Innovation is raising the height of this background so that I can read down below also what is there. Innovation is that. So wherever you go, just think how I can improve it. Your leave is being approved, your boss. Long process. Can I simplify it? So simplify the process. And services. A Swasti hotel, if you want to have a dinner here, each dish will be so much big bowl. And the cost will be around 900 rupees, 800 rupees. A person like me or you, if I alone want to go for dinner, normally in India, we have 2 dishes at least. So if I take 2, I'll be leaving it. I can't finish it. Innovation is having a combo system, 2 or 3 dishes in one plate. That is innovation. And all 5-star hotels, they refuse to accept it. I've told so many of them, hey, Baba, have some combo system. I'm ready to spend 1,000 rupees, but give me a good thali type system, yeah, which Kamath restaurant gives, Haldiram gives, Bikaner gives, but 5-star hotel will not change. And the innovation is now when we go for lunch, you may find there is a big line. Okay, and people will stand in the line and wait. Innovation is putting that things in the center, and people take it from this side also, people take it from this side also. That is innovation. Small things.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for correlating problem solving as one of the first tips. Yes. So just shifting our gears a little, and we all know about startups. No matter how exciting they could be, there's certainly a flip side to it. We see failures, we see success. So according to the experience that you have had for so long, what do you think are the major reasons why startups don't sustain for long, or it really takes them a time to move from a red to a green? What is your observation on that?
Yeah, so what I have observed, again, it is my limited observation. One of the thing is the planning. Okay, so the planning for what is the customer they're targeting and what is the business plan. So all those things, because everything, all startups or whatever you do, so there is money is required to run that. Okay, after certain time, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years. So how to sustain that, whatever the expenditure cost you have. And for for that you should have some revenue or stream. So many times people think that revenue, I'll focus on my product my way, and without going into the market, and that is where the problem, and many times I have seen they fail. And another thing is the sales area. So many times they neglect the sales area, I have seen, and they think that they're technocrat and they can start. So they should have some sales angle as well within them, and where they can pitch whatever the product, service, whatever the definition of what or process. So everywhere there is a sales pitch is required, and then automatically the business should come, and then you can further innovate. You can put all resources, might be in terms of any hardware, software, the consultants, resource, or PhD holders to do the innovation. So whatever idea, and implement those things. For that you need the money, and the key thing is its revenue should continuously come. And initial days, many people, another thing what I observe is they go for funding or loan. Okay, so in my entire career I have taken loan once in my doing my MBA in IIT Kharagpur. After that I've never taken any loan in my life. I told that whatever company I will run in my own, zero, even in interest rate in Japan is close to 0% if you take loan, but still I refuse to take that. And that is one of the lessons I have learned, and avoid taking loan. Of course that is not the great way, but that is my observation. Many people get into the trap and keep taking loan and never ending basically. Yeah. Yamaguchi-san or
David-san, so yeah, in addition that my opinion is, of course, plan is very important, but inside the plan, please agiling the, flexible mind and the small start. So also don't need to don't do any big, try to success short term. So first, please focus in the 1 or 2 customer and start up to feedback. Then agiling the put on, or step by step. So no need to like that. So maybe right side, left side, behind, back. So that's 1 or 2 year. So only focusing the few customer and focusing the small strength point. Then put on. That's my mind. Yeah.
I think yes, what Devendra-san said, adding customers, being customer focused, doing the right marketing, the sales marketing is important for startup. And also I will interject what he said. I mean, agreeing further, they have the tendency to, play around with someone else's money. You call it investor, you call it the financier, whatever it is. And that also comes with, another baggage of overspending. So I think cost reduction and cost control is something startups should keep in mind. It's not like Sarkari Kamal, Darya Medal. Then ultimately you'll bound to be answerable to somebody at some stage, and you are just finished.
Wonderful. There's so many perspectives on this. And if I sum it up together for all of us to listen to that, I think it's having a very strong sales acumen, because that's where your revenue comes from. Remaining humble with your approach when you start off, staying structured, focus on the strategy, what exactly you need, and lastly, financial discipline that Devendra sir spoke about. Before I ask my next question, I just wanted to check, Shubrata, on the time. How much time are we left with? All right. So, absolutely. Maybe I'll open it up to the audience, because we just have 5 minutes. I see a lot of young faces here. Any questions coming from there? Okay, we have a raised hand.
Please tell who your question is. Yes, my question is for Devendra sir and Yamaguchi sir combined. Sir, you have your startups. Is it present in India or in Japan?
Yeah, so I have both places. In India, I have in Chennai, Coimbatore, and Bhubaneswar. I've started 2 years back.
Right, sir. Sir, as you have worked in Japan, and you said that, and Yamaguchi sir also, you said that in every aspect, Japanese companies, startups, and the employees, they tend to innovate. So my question is, what innovation Japanese startup tend to do in their content and marketing department, if at all they do any innovation? And my second question is, will you ever hire, because I have gone through some Japanese websites, The UI UX is wonderful. The content is very crisp, to the point. So they basically think that what users want, what users who are going to navigate into the website, they want to see. And they craft content and craft everything, the design according to that. So my question is, will you hire a non-techie if you are a tech startup? Will you hire a non-techie to write content? And if yes, what sort of certificates or sort of courses you want them to do, like design thinking or lean sigma? They should be lean practitioner. So please, both the question.
So the second question I'll answer first. Okay.
sir.
So for hiring, yeah, non-techie, definitely content writers are in demand. Only thing is that if my website is in Japanese, I need to have a person who is having Japanese knowledge. Of course, the struggle we face is the good content writers are not there in Japan somehow. They're good in putting the things in the pictures way, basically give a lot of pictures and the message will be going. But while writing the content, very few people are there with that. In India, a lot of that area you can target. Okay, but you need to have some, at least some level of Japanese language and the way they think. And definitely design thinking is now emerging in area, and many people are taking training under that. Whatever, I think 2 months, 3 months Stanford University also they have some curriculum in Tokyo also. I have seen that.
Sir, apart from design thinking, what would you suggest to the copywriters?
No, I don't know details basically. Normally, because I outsource to people in
Agencies.
Bangalore. Yeah.
Right. And so what about my first question, like what innovation they tend to do in the content and marketing department?
So that part I do not have much experience content and marketing, but definitely marketing. One of the things I can tell is uh, uh, the way he was telling the employees. Okay, so they take care of the employees, employee first. Like recently, the concept is coming in India also. So they take care of the employees. The employee only spread the message. Okay, and that is the company, that is a work culture and things like that. They are the brand ambassador. They become, and that is the tactful way they do that basically. Yeah.
Sir, I have a question. I am Dr. Girish Swai. I am a development consultant. Question is, you talked a lot many areas about innovation and corporate culture. But one thing we missed, corporate culture not only reflects on organizational behavior. If we look at the basic fragmentation of culture, it's a combination of orientation, behavior, attitude, belief, faith, worship, language, ethnicity, tribes, clans, etc. And if you look into both Japanese and Indian culture, they're drastically poles apart. Japanese is a high content culture and we are a high context culture. We look at the peripheral issues more than the core issue. And second thing is, Japanese people are very workaholic. You enter into any Japanese organization, for example, if a vice president or a chairman enters in a Japanese organization, nobody gives a damn look. They just are engaged in their work. Our culture, we stand up, we say good morning, sir, etc. They don't bother in spending time in these activities. And second thing, the most important thing is innovation, startup is concerned. Japanese people are ethnocentric. You never find a Japanese organization where a non-Japanese is CEO or head of the organization. They very rarely trust other people because their work culture is so content oriented. They believe that it will be diluted if they give this chance to a non-Japanese person. So a startup, when a Japanese-India collaboration is happening, we must look for this assimilation, what Sir told, inclusion, diversity. Japan is very restricted on this inclusion and diversity part. India is a bit flexible, but we need to adapt to their work culture when we go for a Indo-Japanese collaboration in startups.
So I'll just differ all 3 points. That was the culture might be 30, 40 years back. Okay. So last 20 years, it has changed a lot. One is working hard. So definitely whoever Indian goes to outside, they're working hard. Okay. So that's why they have brand ambassador. That's why we succeeded Japanese company. Why they give the business? They see something different because they will trust Japanese. Why they give the business? For example, I have customers who are like 100 years in the industry. They do not give to their Fujitsu, Hitachi, or big companies. They give it to me. because I have established a brand myself. So everybody in Indian is a brand. So they work hard basically. Number two, Indian people are not in the CEO positions. It is not correct. Recently they are giving, for example, this company called Takeda. So that SoftBank, the group CEO, he was from Indian IT Biju. Incidentally, the Vision Fund, the biggest investor fund all over the world, $100 billion, was headed by Rajiv Misraji from UK. You might be knowing that basically. So it is Sonsan has given that because it is not. It was earlier that concept was there, and it is not that they want to mix, because they also realize unless they assimilate with outside world, they cannot. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So they cannot grow further. Yeah.
One quick remark I can make. Quick one. Because Japanese are there. So I just want to share one chota experience. I was on INS Virat. I am Commander VK Jetli, IIT Kharagpur. And when I was on INS Virat, we invited some Japanese ship came to Bombay for dinner and all that. They loved our ship, very neat and clean, shining. Next day, they invited us to their ship. And our eyes were, jisko bolte hain, aankhein chundhiya gayi. It was so neat and clean. So we asked them, how do you keep it so neat and clean? And their reply, their commanding officer reply was, we never make it dirty. We never make it dirty. That is the beauty. And that is what we have learned to learn, जब हम स्वच्छ भारत की बात करते हैं, मूंगफली भी खानी है तो जेब में डालिए छिलका, टॉफी खानी है तो जेब में डालिए, केला खाना तो जेब में हाथ में पकड़ के रखिए till you get a dustbin. So I just wanted to share that.
Very simple is that, even I think in a town or city, it's in my home. You never dirty in your room, right? So in Japan culture is, any public toilet or, if, I go to the cricket and I finish the game, then if some garbage here. So because this is in my home, please normally to the back to the garbage or clean up. That's a omotenashi, or after come to the another person, what they think. If, happy, very clean, happy. Also, when, we leave the restaurant, so we try to clean up also how helpful to the next person. That's, keeping to the mindset in our culture. But honestly, that yesterday I visited his company, and everyone's, their employees, everyone to the very appreciate to the hospitality. So I say that no difference, Indian member and team, people and the Japanese people, everyone respecting your, everyone people. So only small difference is like, if clean, please you think about my home in the Bhubaneswar. I also, Bhubaneswar is my home.
Ownership mentality.
Correct.
Ownership mentality. This is my.
Yes, that's my answer.
Do we have time for one more question or we close? Okay. Sribrata tells me we are out of time. Certainly clear that we had a lot of questions which remained unasked. It was interesting. It was both my privilege and pleasure to have this panel here. And I think all of us have enjoyed getting the expertise, getting the observations they have had, and guiding us on our journeys of startups and entrepreneurs if we want to be. So thank you so much, sir. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Sribrata. I know scheduling is not always an easy job. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Please have a huge round of applause for all the panelists over here.
Dhanyabad. Dhanyabad.
So for the next session, which was postponed, Fictionalizing Realities. Please have a huge round of applause to invite the speakers, Sumit Sharma Samir, Himanshu Shekhar Mahapatra, Deepika Mukherjee, along with the moderator, Ashwini Kumar. The claps should not stop. Please welcome to the speakers.
know that this is happening. Huh?
At least
At least
the full panel is here.
the full I know. There will be 4 of us listening to each other. Three of us, each talking.
So we can like take, yeah.
Hi, Ashwini. How are you? Seeing you after such a long time. Looking good? Yeah.
I'm sitting on this side.
Let him sit in the middle. I can go to the other side. Huh? Hello.
How are you?
Very good. And you? It's all right. It's okay.
No, you said up. Yeah, I'm sitting here. Please go to the middle. So I'm Himanshu Mukhtar. Yeah.
They're told always, but they are the same disciple because he always reminds that Indian essays are always very good.
Indian essays.
Yeah. When you Europe,
I think they go full blast.
Full blast. That's what the same believes.
Somebody left your book there.
Yes, the title is Fictionalizing Realities, but
Yeah.
that is all that we know now.
Yeah, same, yeah.
So you're the moderator. So
No,
you
no
have to,
idea. I just landed at the airport and got a call that you have a session.
Himanshu Mahapatra. Himanshu Mahapatra. I'm an academic professor. Typical university. I mean, I taught. I mean, I'm retired now.
Yeah. No, I'm retiring, so.
Typical university.
No, I said I told him I'm retiring, so I'm a professor too.
Okay.
Yeah.
English?
No. Good Lord, I never taught English, but I write English.
I was an English professor.
Yeah. Chalo.
First, let me thank you. Rashmi is here or gone? I guess I'm the founder director of Kalinga Festival for inviting me here to this panel. Also, Kalinga Festival. And this year, Kalinga Festival has been a wonderful experience. And I can see, before I go to the panel, I also must congratulate Asutosh Parida Bhai here. I'm a winner of our Sahitya Academy Award for Odia. And please give him a big hand. Asutosh Babu. And I can see in the audience one of the most celebrated Bangla poets, Ansuman Kar, Durga Panda, and others are sitting here. And I'm sure they will love this title, Fictionalizing Realities, If there is no reality in a sense of monolithic reality, not in a meta sense, but perhaps, this is the best time to move back and forth in the sense of, fiction and the reality. And the title is, pretty much Derridian, Professor Mahapatra is a professor and taught English literature. So I'm back here in the sense of Derridian paradox, that what is this fiction and what is this reality, and how do, fiction and reality blur each other, what is called, fiction. Is fiction really reality, or is reality a fiction? I mean, since ages, and if you all know, I can see young people sitting here in the audience. The writing, in the sense of, prose writing is quite recent as opposed to poetry. I mean, that's where when you read Asutosh Bhai's poetry, that's that voice, primal voice. And that's why poetry is the voice of gods and goddesses. On the other hand, the fiction or the prose coincidentally, arises out of a certain technological, power in the sense of printing press. Imagine if there is no printing press, we even can't write fiction and publish it. We can write fiction, but we can't, fictionalize reality in the sense of, circulating the reality all around. So coming back here and thinking about, fictionalizing reality, and so what I would like panelists to reflect on, Dipali here and Deepika, sorry, yeah, I'm just clueless, I'm so tired, and Durga told me that you have become festival hopper, in fact, airport to airport, in fact, ask me, he can Kar Sahib is here, and please forgive me. I'm absolutely tired. Yeah. So what I would like the panel to reflect on this whole art of fictionalizing reality. So, Professor Mahapatra, based on your experience and relating to your own works. And so that I can come back to the Indian scene. First, let's think about what is this fiction and fictionalizing reality. Do we really fictionalize reality, or we just imagine reality in a different sense?
Yeah. Thank you, Ashwin. Well, first of all, I think that I am an odd man out in this panel.
How come you can? You have been
a
very eminent professor. Yeah,
right.
Deepika, just
But
imagine.
I thought by looking at the other panelists, one of them is absent. I thought that this was actually a panel for those who have written creative work, published creative work, and they would be called upon to reflect upon how they approach, or how their fiction reflects upon reality. So I am not a creative writer in that sense. I have been an academic for the most part of my life. I have written critical and scholarly essays. But towards the end of my career, after my retirement, I have translated. I have begun, a journey as a translator. And I have also started some creative writing of late. So I'll talk about my creative writing later in the round. But I'll take up your first question about the relationship between fiction and reality. I think if you look at the evolution of the novel, in the beginning, in the 18th century, for instance, when the novel arose in Europe, in Britain, it was seen as a realistic document. The fictionality concept is a much recent concept, is a very recent concept. Recent in the sense, I would say that, it basically developed, or it basically came in the 1960s, along with the rise in post-structuralist and postmodernist forms of critical discourse. So they gave fictionality a kind of, a status. Okay. But novel, traditionally understood, was supposed to be a reflection of reality, and a novel was a history. It was, the term that was synonymous with the novel was history. When Henry Fielding wrote Tom Jones, he called it the history of Tom Jones. Likewise, his other novels, Roderick Random or Richardson's Pamela or Clarissa, they were all novels which tried to document a very significant aspect of the life of the society. Perhaps in the 18th century also there was another very unique kind of novel by Lawrence Stern called Tristram Shandy. Now, that was a novel which basically tried to play with the form of the fiction, form of the writing. It was not so much a reflection of a reality that was external. It was basically an experiment with the mode of telling itself. So later writers, post-structuralist and postmodernist writers, go back to Tristram Shandy and see it as the inauguration of this idea of fictionality. But if you ask me, after 18th century, we have the 19th century novels like, novelists like Dickens or George Eliot or Thackeray, Elizabeth Gaskell, Jane Austen, for example, before that, they were writing realist fictions. They were, they had no qualms about writing realist fictions. They did not feel embarrassed about having to write a realistic portrayal of the manners and morals of the society. So fictionality is a very late concept, in my opinion, but now it has become very important. Now it has become very important, especially, for example, with the rise of what is called the magical realism of Gabriel Garcia Marquez or Salman Rushdie or, other writers. Their reality has become subsidiary to fiction. Reality is something that the fiction gobbles up and projects as a kind of fantasy. So these are some of the quick reflections that I can give you.
So, Professor Mahapatra, given this whole genesis, I can see Ansuman, Professor Carr is sitting here. He teaches, similar areas. Yeah. And he's chuckling and thinking about, maybe whenever, fiction comes to my mind, I always think of great philosopher Hegel, because Hegel, who really popularized this idea of fiction as the saga of middle class, emergent middle class, or the bourgeoisie in the West, So the career of a novelist and the career of a society coincides here in the sense of, becoming the saga, the story of emergent bourgeoisie. And in that sense, fiction, in the sense, responded to the realities, That's what fiction did in the beginning in terms of, great philosopher Hegel. But of late, as you rightly mentioned, across the world, Gabriel Marquez also, whenever he wrote, in fact, I remember him the other day I was reading some of the letters of Marquez, and this idea that I did for Jayanta Mahapatra, Scent of Rain, actually this idea clicked in my mind when I read one of his letters where he talks about scent of guava. He was eating as a child guava, and that scent, stayed with him all his life. So coming to Deepika, this whole idea of scent in the sense of, imaginary, my sense is that fiction, if I look at etymologically, fiction refers to a connection with reality. But something, I would like to highlight in the sense of imaginary, isn't it fantasy part of the reality? What is fantasy? It doesn't come out, out of blue, in a Lacanian sense, it comes from nowhere and then becomes reality. So when you write, Deepika, how do you look at this relationship between, reality and fiction? And then we will, think about how to, and how does it get reflected? War and Peace, where Tolstoy is also a reflection on ongoing war, the real war. And part of it is certainly, as a novelist and a writer, you rely on imagination, imaginary. Is that imaginary or fiction important for you?
Thank you. I just want to introduce myself a little bit so that you understand where I'm coming from. I live in Chicago and I teach novel writing at the University of Chicago, but my PhD is in sociolinguistics. So I also I teach sociolinguistics academically. But I would like to get back to something that you'd said, Professor Mahapatra. You mentioned a lot of, I'm sorry? Himanshu, okay. Yeah, I think that you mentioned, a lot of writers in the English tradition. And and you had mentioned this in an earlier panel as well, that we really should talk about Indian writers. So allow me, without being rude about this, to take us to some Indian writers. Now, if we look at how fiction and reality have merged in Indian fiction recently, I am sort of thinking about a few novels or writings that come to mind. Burnt Sugar was something that did very well recently. And I think it was the first novel where somebody wrote against what is perhaps our largest taboo still left in India, that is talking about a mother who is not perfect. an abnormal mother. Of course, Jerry Printo has already done this in M and the Big Home. But if you just really look at it, these are taken from life, but they're fictionalized enough to be palatable. Because obviously, if you talk about somebody who is bipolar or who has mental issues, and she's your mother or your father or whatever, it's very hard to digest that. But the way the writers have done it is they have told a story with a narrative arc, as we say, beginning, middle, and the end. And they have enough of craft in there to keep you engaged. Yes? So the craft of fictionalizing what is real is very, very important. Now, I think it's very important to have verisimilitude in your writing, which is a term that means that fiction should mimic reality, although it is not reality. Yes? So it is because if we make something very, very strange, unless we are writing in science fiction and, fabulous kind of writing, no one's going to digest it. So we have exemplary authors. Even if you go to Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things, kind of one of the first books that really talked about very deep social inequities in India. And she's brought in things from her own mother's life as well. But it is in the form of fiction. She won the Booker because it is a work of fiction. But nobody in this room, I think, will disagree with me in terms of some of the reality, very, very strong realities that underpin that book. So I think when we are talking about fiction and reality, as a writer myself, my first novel was on Malaysian sociopolitics. I have lived and worked in Malaysia for many years. My husband is Malaysian. So I wrote a very political novel on Malaysia because the censorship laws in Malaysia are such that if you offend the government, you can be locked up without trial. So I was writing a political novel that started with the murder of a model in a particular field in Shah Alam, all based on reality. And what I had to do is I had to fictionalize this by making the model from a different country, giving her a different name. But there was enough in the book to ban it in Malaysia when it first came out. Then when it got picked up by a UK publisher called Repeater, who are like Haymarket Books that do Arundhati Roy's books right now, they're very sort of, left, and they do political fiction. So now it is available around the world. It was, retitled as Ode to Broken Things. So I understand very much the reason why people would have to fictionalize something that is actually real. And I do teach memoir writing at the University of Chicago as well. So if anyone has any questions about how to write about a family that is dysfunctional and still get it published and still have relationships with your family, I would be happy to answer that. Or to make it more palatable. Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, this is where I think Ashutosh Bhai has come in at the right time, because then the larger issue. That's also, fancy, as you said, in post-colonial literature, feminist literature, Black literature, Hispanic, Adivasi literature. If you look at Dalit literature particularly, like, if you look at, in Maharashtra, Daya Pawar's works, autobiographical, and also at the same time, gives you a sense of fiction, powerful fiction. So all these boundaries are getting blurred, the fiction and the reality boundaries. But the question still remains here with us, that what is it that defines a fiction? What are the essential, even if it is a family docudrama, it's based on, family documents, albums and diaries. And novelists have used a lot of tools and methodologies to come up with. But on the other hand, if you look at, the great, novelists like Tolstoy in the Russian tradition, a great epic can be written in a purely imaginary way. imaginary way, although responding to real issue in the life. But it can be when you read back to because I remember very close relationship I share with one of the greatest writers in India, Damodar Mauji Bhai. We call him Maujo Bhai and Gyanpith awardee. And if you look at his last 50 years of work, who redefined Konkani language in many ways. And his great work is Carmelian. And I remember, the Carmelian is considered classic, as classic as War and Peace. And this is where, we started thinking about Indian novel tradition. And the Carmelian, I remember, the story, I'll take little time because I'm trying to connect, or establish a relationship between reality and fiction. It is about a woman who goes to Middle East, and then the story of the Middle East. She works there and becomes a house slave, and at the same time she has a full family here in Goa. And this is a story in Goa. Many women, from Bombay and Goa, they go and work in Middle East. In Kerala, similar stories you will find. But here the woman he met, actually his grocery store. Damodar Bhai used to run a grocery store. Now after Gyanpith, he has shut down and has become pure. And then he went on talking to her and, hours and hours and hours, taking, copious notes. And then he wrote, two Kar Sahib, two stories actually, not one novel. And then later on, he published two stories combined as a novel, and that became great classic work, Carmelian. And here is my, what I would like to reflect on. But when I, asked him about the character Carmelian, he said this character is fiction. The real Carmelian I met, and I got the whole story from the real Carmelian. But the Carmelian that you see in my novel is actually a fictional Carmelian. So I'm asking both of you and Himanshu that what is this part, when a novelist, a fiction writer, in fact, if you look at Fakir Senam Pati's work, the classic work here. And, much before Premchand, he, spoke about it, wrote about, dispossession, land and peasant, But mostly it's a fiction also. So what is this, how do, despite all this, blurring of the boundaries, how does a novelist, as you have just heard, a novelist, is it simply, reflection of the reality as I mentioned in the sense of Carmelian? Is there a Carmelian in everybody's work?
Thank you, Ashwin. I'll go back to what you said in the beginning about Hegel. You talked about Hegel. Actually, the critic who used Hegel's theory to define a novel is George Lukács, the Hungarian critic. And his classic definition of the novel is something that always appeals to me, even if the Lukácsian paradigm is passé now. And the definition is the novel is the epic of a world abandoned by God. The novel is the epic of a world abandoned by God. Because epic used to be written in the ancient times under the supervision of the gods. There was a belief in gods, but in novel, we don't have that belief in God. The world has become secular and the world has become mundane and banal, and the novelist sets out to document that banal and prosaic world. So that is what a novel is, and the preoccupation with reality comes from that. And the reality that we are talking about is the mundane, everyday reality. Okay, now the question of fictionalizing comes because of two reasons. One is that if you represent reality, the everyday reality, banal reality, there is also a risk that you might antagonize people. They will be able to see their reflections in the characters that you have created. So first important thing that you need to do is to mask them. So Ramachandra Mangaraj in Chaman Athagund in Fakir Mohan Senapati's novel, that may not be a real character. Ramachandra Mangaraj is a Jamindar we see him as a representative Jamindar. He represents the tyrannical Jamindar class. But there may not be necessarily a person named Ramachandra Mangaraj living in Fakir Mohan's time or living in at any point in history. Right. But the mechanism of oppression that Fakir Mohan has described in that novel is very realistic. The mechanism of reflection, the landlordism, the absentee landlord system, the sunset law, all these things that Fakir Mohan has invoked in that novel, they are very real. And that leads to that story of depeasantization. But by Bhagia and Saria, the two simple weavers, are reduced to penury. Okay, now, when I looked at this title, Fictionalizing Realities, I had one quick response. I thought that we are talking about evaporation of reality. The process by which you empty reality out of the novel and turn everything into fantasy. But it is nice that Deepika pointed out the strong dose of the real in some of these Indian fictions, like Arundhati Roy, or let us say, I haven't read Jerry Pinto. But even Suitable Boy, Vikram Seth's A Suitable Boy, or Kiran Desai, Inheritance of Loss. Many of these novels. So I think we cannot do without reality. Reality is a very important starting point, but how do you portray that reality? You cannot portray reality in that raw form. That's why,
Here Deepika wants to say.
Yeah, I think, I think we must be running out of time as well. So one of the things that I wanted to point out, especially those of you who are in this room, and maybe you want to write a work of fiction and you want to go big and win the Booker Prize, like so many of our writers are doing. Please, yes, have a dream, go for it, What I'd like to say that one of the biggest issues that is happening in Western publishing right now is the issue of cultural appropriation. Now, most of the writers writing in English in our country are of upper caste and well educated. So should you write something that brings in, let's say, a Dalit problem, some, Adivasi problem, then how are you qualified to write it? And in the West, they do have people who check these sorts of things so that you don't offend a particular person. Zadie Smith, who is a very well-known writer, says this very well, that instead of cultural appropriation, we should treat it as perhaps intercultural curiosity. All right? Instead of appropriation, we call it a curiosity or something like that. And I think that there is a lot of really good work being done out there. You mentioned about losing God in literature. I have to say, Himanshu, I think that when you write, you are God. You can kill your characters. You can make them do what you want. So in a sense, the novelist becomes the God. And Hilary Mantel, who has written the Cromwell trilogy and won 2 Booker Prizes in a row, which has never happened to anyone. Wolf Hall and Bring Up the Bodies and so on. She says this very beautifully. Hilary Mantel, Hilar. Yes, Mantel, the last name. So she's the only one to have won 2 Bookers in a row, and she writes phenomenally. And she says very beautifully, the pen is in our hands. A happy ending is ours to write. And I think this goes very much for those of us who grew up in post-colonial worlds. And people like Usman Malik, who is a doctor in Pakistan, but he writes worldwide, is doing that so beautifully. He's taking stories from the subcontinent and writing it for a very worldwide, audience. And he's mingling reality and fiction and making it palatable for a very global audience. Yeah.
On this note, Professor Kar Sahib would like to say something. Yeah, mingling. Yeah, please. Kar Sahib, come in here. I can see Kar Sahib. No, he's one of the finest
Thank you, Ashini. Yeah, you can read faces. A magician. Deepika was talking about being a god. An author is also a magician as well. Thank you, all three of you, for giving us a very wonderful session. Actually, I have an observation to make and also a question, and that is for Deepika. The observation is this, that we have been talking mostly in this session about the genesis of the novel from the perspective of the West, and how reality is understood in the West, or academically also in the West. But if you look at the Indian traditions of storytelling, and the genesis of novel in India, which was also partly modeled after the West, definitely initially. But what about the kahanis and the kissas and all those things, meaning the issue that Ashini touched upon in the beginning? I'd just like to add something to that, that our understanding of reality is something that includes the fantasy, the fantastic, the imaginary. So our notion of reality is something which is absolutely different. So this is something that, and this entire discourse on how to fictionalize reality, becomes really, a kind of a problematic if we keep in mind the Indian tradition of telling stories and writing novels as well. So this is the observation that I wanted to make, that this is reality which is inclusive of the imaginary. And for Deepika ma'am, I'm just thinking about this, that because this is true that you are a god when you write a novel. I also keep on writing a little bit of fiction in Bangla, but I'm primarily known as a poet. But I have seen some of the stalwarts of Bengali literature talking about, for instance, Shirchendu Mukhopadhyay, Sunil Gangobadhyay, talking about the impossibility of controlling the characters after a certain point of time. But what about this? That can there be a position when the character overpowers the writer, grows in such a way that nothing is ultimately in the hands of the author, and the godly stature of the author is subverted to some extent?
Yes, I think it is part of our hubris to even feel that that we have control, because very often I think as novelists we really are just the conduit, and you don't even know what is being channeled through you. And sometimes when students are asking about this, I feel that writing is a form of meditation as well for me. And when I get into the zone where I'm just writing and it's just coming, I don't even realize, and it's 5 o'clock in the morning, I write through the night and the birds are chirping, outside. So yes, I think you're right that, the story takes over, but I think at the same time, it is the author that starts with the story, and finally the edits, which I hate to do edits, but as someone who publishes in the West, you have multiple levels of edits, and that is when you can sometimes decide, or your editor will decide, who to kill and who to keep. Like in my second novel, my editor said there has to be a love story, so I had to put in a kiss, which is really ridiculous. Yeah. Going back to science fiction and fantasy, I'm really glad you said that, because science fiction and fantasy is now one of the most diverse genres in the world, and the people who are like the gods of science fiction and fantasy, besides Neil Gaiman and people like that, are actually South Asian writers, and I'm very proud of that. Yeah.
Here, Himanshu.
Thank you, Angshuman. Durga, you wanted to...
Yeah.
Well, please ask your question.
Sir, I don't have a question, but I felt tempted to say something regarding this reality and fantasy. Let me give you a situation. Imagine a film. Imagine you are watching a film where a beggar boy, very traumatized, without food, is shown on the screen. He is being sued by shop owners, by everybody, a dejected boy. And people and the crowd, the viewers, are almost crying, identifying with the scene. And when
interval happens, another beggar boy in reality enters the cinema hall and begs alms from the viewers, and no one bothers. So there you are. The reality, the manufactured reality, the fantasy is more powerful than reality itself. See how a lie which is constructed, a director who directed a film, a character who acted could bring tears to the viewer's eyes, whereas blatant reality, brazenly enacted before the audience, brings no emotions at all.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is the irony, that when reality is trivialized, it becomes more powerful than reality itself. Thank you.
Lovely, lovely comment. And that's why, Durga, I guess reality is fiction. Yeah, yeah.
Ma'am,
Any questions?
we are
Yeah.
already getting
No, no.
late for the lunch.
We
So
will take question. Yeah, couple. Yeah. No. They are taking. We are taking. हाँ बोलिए.
Good afternoon. I
But
don't know
आराम
what to
से say your name. आराम से. Yeah, just relax
but
and
like
say.
my question was to all three of you. First of all, I'm grateful to be listening things that I had never imagined to listen. But yeah, my question is like, so like I am someone who was born after 2000. So for me, even like the times you speak of, the postmodernism, contemporary literature, that is for me also, that's also old for me, like 1950s, 1960s.
Yeah, yeah.
So what is the thing that like separates the classic literature from the contemporary literature in the purest sense of the word? And I will like to have another question to Deepika ma'am.
The first question is pretty much academic. Yeah. I run a collective involved in translating classic novels of Indian literature, and that's the way we conceptualize classic. Is classic not in the sense of time? There is element of classic. In the sense of eternal value of the novel, and spanning across geographies, generation. And in fact, Jerry Pinto recently translated one of the Marathi novels. It's called Vishram Bedekar's novel is Battleship. And the second, we did, so classics like Premchand's Godan, Fakir Sena Mohanty's is classic. So this classic is determined, through some, principles of, artistic and historical merit. That's I would like to sum up, briefly, I guess. Yeah, you also.
Yeah. I just want to say, though, that, I don't know why we need to have these hierarchies at classics, postmodern, because for one thing, the classics, when they were like, even if you take the classics in the Western canon, they were pretty much made up of white men. And it was a network of white men choosing their friends to be classics. And now if you go into literature that's being published, there's a lot more diversity, a lot more, women's voices, a lot more trans voices. And I think the kind of literature that you consider classist, classic, is really actually very classist. So I think we should fight against that. And your generation, as such, is doing the best work in writing what you want to write, what you want to change the world with. So do that. Yeah.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense, breaking out of the hierarchies. But I have a different point of view here. Every classic is not casteist and is a trash can. It's not that the way it is. But there are, ways of looking at classic differently. There is diversity in the literature, even in those times of classic also. So we wanted to, Himanshu, say something.
Basically, I was waiting for this last opportunity because what I spoke earlier was in my capacity as a critic and an academic, and I don't believe in that anymore. Yeah. Because that's the world that I had left behind. I have of late started writing fiction, and I call it autofiction. Okay. Autofiction, very short pieces, but I'm trying to write an autobiography in the form of fiction, but not in a very sustained and systematic way. I'm writing short glimpses, vignettes of important moments in my life, and if it sees the light of day in the next 1 year or so, It's in English. It is in English. Otherwise, how will you read it?
I would translate.
Yeah. So my tentative title is Spots of Time. Spots of Time. A very Wordsworthian concept, So, but then this is what I'm seize on moments, and I'm trying to string together these moments to form a narrative. So, I would just like to read two or three sentences of the very first autofiction that I published. Yeah, yeah, and yes, my title is A Capital Betrayal. Very simple. It is ingrained in my life, so I believe that reality is indispensable. It's my experience. I mean, I don't call it reality. It's my experience. I want to write about my experience, how I came to Bhubaneswar, what happened when I came to Bhubaneswar. So I call it Capital Betrayal. From early childhood, the fear of trains was ingrained in Subrat. A stage had now come when he clung on to them for dear life. From a terrible fear of the train, he had gone to a fatal embrace of it. In short, he had become a reluctant member of that amphibian species called the commuter. His life parceled out between land and wheels, raised 6 inches above the ground. So this
Lovely.
Is last,
Yeah, wonderful.
the last sentence. The last sentence. Sorry. The last sentence. His fond belief was that the letter B was a good omen. So far, his major life events had played out in places that began with B: Baripada, birth and breeding; Balangir, romance; Bhavanipatna, first teaching job at a college; Barhampur, first teaching job at a university. To this list was now added Bhubaneswar, the big B among these names. But it had flattered to deceive. It was B for betrayal.
Lovely. Fantastic. Last question I will take. We already said 20 minutes. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, in terms of understanding fiction and reality, as many of us are going through frames, Professor Mahapatra, like magical realism. Now, my query is that we must also understand the relationship between reality and realization. Secondly, in terms of realism, the diversity of realism from the experience of planetary creativity. Just referring to Marquez is not enough. We must look into the way even magical realism is practiced in Africa. In Toni Morrison's magical realism is not the same thing, and therefore the framing of understanding along with socialism and social realism and magical realism, we must also include what is called spiritual realism. And to understand the creative works, for example, in India, like Manoj Das' work, we need to have this perspective of spiritual realism.
Wonderful. I think we are running out of the time because we are ending this panel on a very profound note of experiencing reality as a spiritual experience. Thank you very much for listening and enjoying this panel. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, speakers. Let's move on to the downstairs for the lunch, and we'll get back to the hall after 30 minutes.
Ode to Broken Things. Ode. It's from Pablo Neruda novel.